Hello, everyone. I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. This is our second post-Harvey hearing, 6 months post-Harvey. This is our one for the Missouri City area. And I want to take this opportunity to thank all of you for coming out, but I'd like to render a special thank you to our pastor who has allowed us to use his church. So we're going to ask him, Pastor Grady, to come up and give us a welcome. Thank you.
We want to just thank you for coming out to participate in this post-Harvey community forum. We want to welcome you, of course, to Briar Chase Missionary Baptist Church. And she said that this is my church. No, this is God's church. And I'm just thankful He allowed me to be a steward. And I'm thankful that in this community, He's given us opportunity to have doors open, have resources available for you guys to come out. We, of course, had hoped that there'd be more of the community involved, but I've learned that it doesn't take many to do a great thing. So we're hoping that the information that we get today we'll be able to pass out throughout the communities. I'll likewise pass this information out on Sundays and Wednesdays. And I'm hoping that as we go throughout the community, at the various schools and at the various community events, we'll be able to pass on these words. So once again, we extend always a warm welcome to the NAACP and anything that the Missouri City chapter and Vicinity chapter have on their agenda. We have open arms. Madam President has been just a wonderful, not only wonderful personality, but just a wonderful person. And we pray and hope, and will continue to pray and hope much success for the Missouri City and Vicinity branch of the NAACP. So without further ado, we want to have some greetings from our panelists today, and I'm going to step aside. And Madam President, would you like to speak first or introduce, or just everybody knows who they are, so y'all come up and greet and just give a word so that we can have all this recorded, and we'll get right to the questions. All right, come on.
Hi, everyone. I want to introduce our Commissioner, Grady Prestage. He has been working very hard in our communities, and we want to welcome him for joining us in our hearings upon today.
Yeah, greetings, and rather than bore you with a whole bunch of pleasantries and salutations, I'll just say I'm Grady Prestage. I'm Fort Bend County Commissioner. I've been in this position for the last 28 years, and seen this community evolve a lot, and I'm happy to see anybody gather together to talk about what's happening and what we can do to make our community better. So greetings and welcome, and I'll go sit down and look forward to a lively discussion.
Thank you, Commissioner Prestage. He didn't say, but he is Precinct 2, which we're currently in. I'm Ron Reynolds. I'm proud to serve as State Representative for District 27, which we're currently in. And I want to thank Pastor Grant for always opening up the doors to his church. Briar Chase has been a great friend to the NAACP since I was president of this branch. And this church has, quite frankly, been the most supportive church in Fort Bend for the NAACP. And so Briar Chase has a great history of helping. So thank you, Pastor, for opening up your doors. And I too want to commend the President, Lynette Reddix, for her leadership, and the NAACP for having this discussion. Hurricane Harvey was devastating for the city of Houston, for Fort Bend, and for the state of Texas. It was a very bad it was a disaster. We've been working very hard and diligently from the state of Texas with our local officials like Commissioner Grady Prestage, with our federal congressman, to get relief efforts to help those families and those businesses that were displaced. And I'm very proud to say that we've made tremendous strides. Recently, I was at a press conference with Governor Abbott and Mayor Sylvester Turner and other state representatives, county commissioners, to talk about that. We had the county judge from Harris County, Ed Emmett, and we talked about the first infusion of money from the federal government. And we still have a long way to go to make people whole. And we want to continue to make sure that all of the families that were impacted are, they're better and they're stronger. And I know that Fort Bend County is resilient. We have, I like to say we're Fort Bend strong because we definitely weathered this Hurricane Harvey tremendously. And there's still lessons to be learned. I had a lot of constituents that were impacted, and Commissioner Grady, Prestage, and I, we held one of the first public hearings that was in the Siena Annex to listen to those constituents about some of those concerns. So there's some lessons that we learned post-Harvey that we can do to prepare. This was 100-year, it exceeded 100-year expectations in terms of we were prepared. It exceeded that. So I don't know if people can really grapple with just how bad it was. But thank God that we had a lot of people, ordinary citizens, that helped out those who were in need, and we're banding together to make sure that there's no one that's left behind. So thank you for allowing me to say some words. I do, unfortunately have another engagement, and I can't stay for the entire time, but I'm going to certainly follow up with the NAACP. And I just want to say this last thing about the NAACP. This summer, after Harvey, our national president came down, and I know, Lynette, you called me. You were actually, I think, in Atlanta maybe. You were out of town, and you wanted to make sure that the NAACP, the national president, had an opportunity to come to Fort Bend, and they did. They came to Missouri City at George Johnson's place in Lake Olympia, and we were able to Gary Bledso and other, Howard Jefferson from the national board, we were able to have the NAACP national office come down to this area to make sure that, Fort Bend wasn't left behind. And too often we see them come to Houston and other big cities, Dallas and San Antonio, but very rarely do they come to Missouri City. But thank you that the national president came to Missouri City. And so we definitely appreciate that, the NAACP's involvement. And specifically, they wanted to make sure that African Americans, who usually, when it comes to disparities, African Americans are at the bottom. Those who don't have insurance, those who don't have health care. So those who were devastated by Harvey, they didn't have the resources. The NAACP was here to make sure that those African Americans weren't left behind. And so I'm very grateful for that. Now, we had a meeting with Mayor Turner and others to make sure that when contracts were going to be divvied out, Peter, that African Americans were at the table, okay? We wanted to make sure that African Americans were at the table for the rebuild process, for the construction process, so that there could be more economic opportunities. And that's one of the things that the NAACP is making sure, that not just the citizens are made whole, but that African American business owners, that they get opportunities for those contracts. And I'm very thankful for the NAACP for doing that. So thank you. Our Texas State President, Gary Bledso, I don't know if you want to introduce him. Gary Bledso, and also the interim dean of the Thurgood Marshall School of Law. Yes, he wears many hats, an attorney extraordinaire. So, Mr. Gary Bledso.
Reynolds, thank you so much. I've really appreciated all the work you do and things you've done at the legislature and here in the community when you were the local branch president. And I want to thank Carol for organizing this meeting, and Alonzo for helping to come up here and organize that and drive in from Austin. Thank everyone for being here. And I know Commissioner Prestage and I go back way back when we didn't have gray hairs. I'm really glad that we've got this organized. I don't want to talk too much, but I think this is an enormous opportunity for us to maybe do something that hasn't been done in other places because we have so many different forces in the community that are coming together with this in terms of trying to keep the information, et cetera, and assemble information, because minority communities have frequently been the victims of these storms. One of the things that you find out when you get involved in these storms is it's like a cottage industry, and you've got people already set up and ready to come in and get contracts and do what they do everywhere. And so the whole process is not user-friendly. A few folks are able to come in locally, but what you find is that there are huge numbers of folks that kind of get left out, whether it's like the census, but much more difficult because you don't have folks going door to door like you do with the census. So the numbers are going to be multiplied in terms of folks who are not reached out to or not contacted. And I think one of the other things about the whole process is when you look at what occurs, the claims that individuals are made, actions are taken, and if you're not really sophisticated, you maybe don't understand that a rejection isn't a rejection. Only certain folks kind of know the little language and things that folks need to know. And so when folks don't either know to make contact or don't know to make contact with the right folks to represent them, there are all kinds of reasons how folks get left out. And so what we're trying to do is to help identify and to document, present information that'll help show what the issues and problems are, because sadly these storms are going to continue to happen, right? I mean, we know that the whole thing with climate change and all that and where we are, I think something's got to be done affirmatively to try to change that. But until that happens, we know they're going to happen. So we might as well get prepared for next fall, because there will be another one. And then after that, and that's sad, but I'm just being very honest. And we need to be realistic about that. So you empower the community by coming forward. And so I would encourage you, for anyone who's not even here today, if you know other folks who've had issues or problems or concerns, have them reach out to us and provide us the information that they have, because we can try to help them on the one hand, and secondly, just by knowing the issue, because everyone's issue is going to be just a little bit different, right? And so if we know that information, then that's going to help us be able to address it, help us to be able to raise what the potential pitfalls and things like that folks might be encountering, so we can hone in on those, so that we can make sure that that poor people or minorities aren't just so disadvantaged to where they end up much worse than others do compared to where they were before the storm, which I think is what is likely to happen. And so we're trying to prevent that. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you. I want to thank everyone for being here. We're looking forward to hear what you have to say. But again, I want to encourage you, if you know other folks that have had issues or concerns, to get that information to us, because information is power. And we're seeking to have power that we can render and utilize for you. When something comes up in Austin, we need Representative Reynolds to have that kind of information if he needs to push for some kind of changes within the state apparatus. I haven't been really pleased with how the state monies and things like that were handled, to be very honest about that. And it's kind of like an insider baseball deal, and that's not a good situation. And we empower Commissioner Prestage and other elected officials here when we give them information. So you can show empirically that something happened. So anyway, be forthright, give us details, give us whatever leads and information that you can, and we can try to work together to make sure that the problems that people are going to encounter are going to be much less severe than what they would be. And I think you could have a great positive impact on making sure that good things happen. So thank you guys for being here. And
We have some interesting things to say today, and one of the most interesting things is people need to tell their story. A lot of times they tell it to one another, but don't tell it to the right person. and they don't get any help. It's like talking to a vacuum. Now, we have Grady Prestage here. He's out of Austin. He's a state rep. We have our commissioner here. We have a state president here, and we have our local pastor here of this church. But then everything is a circle. We understand that when he goes to Austin, he has to have something to fight with and someone to fight for. If he does not have your information, it's no need to complain to the lady next door when you haven't told him. One of the problems that we have is when contracts are given out, the information that we get is already old. And then when we have to secure information for other people to go into business especially, then they don't even have the right information they need to do it. And one of the questions I want to ask to both of you all is, how do they obtain the right information for the debris pickup?
I'm an explainer. That's a word I just made up. I'm an explainer. I'm going to explain it to you how it worked. And I'm talking specifically about Fort Bend County. So that's the only experience that I have. I can't tell you what happened in Harris County, what happened in Rockport, what happened in Jefferson County, Fort Bend County. Fort Bend County got the same severe weather situation that everybody else got. But we learned a lesson back from Hurricane Ike. When Hurricane Ike came, we had to scramble to work within the state purchasing laws and still get our debris removed as fast as we could. The state purchasing laws don't allow you to just say, hey, you go do it. Now, some things you can do when an emergency is declared, but still you got all these administrative things you have to deal with. So since Hurricane Ike, every year the county developed a practice of bidding out debris removal services just in case. So we had pre-positioned contracts. And so some years we'd have one vendor who said, I'm gonna submit a very, very competitive bid, a low bid, so maybe if something happens, it'll be my turn. And some years there were smaller companies, some years there were bigger companies. Before the storm, maybe 2 months before the storm, we had approved a contract, a pre-positioned contract for debris removal with a major company. Okay, a major company, Albrit Environmental, so it's a major company. And so they were ready when the storm happened. In fact, while the event was going on, they were on the phone saying, we're ready whenever, you want to start the recovery. So they were in place. And they had high-end equipment. They had big tandem trucks with grapplers on it. And, we had the best position assets in place when that happened. So the debris removal and the process in Fort Bend County went well. It went very well, so I got no war stories. I got no horror stories about that. The only problem we had is that everybody who knew me, who had a dump truck and a backhoe, wanted to get a contract. But unfortunately, we bid a contract. And so, and anything else we would have done would have just been window dressing. I mean, they had all the assets to take care of it, and they did. And so there was no real horror story there. And so, I'll have something to complain about. And this is something I want to present to Representative Reynolds, and he's probably heard it before, is that when you have a crisis, sometimes the law gets in the way. Okay, if you have a 72-hour posting period for a meeting, okay, it's kind of hard to do that in a crisis. You can call an emergency meeting, but you have to limit the agenda, and a lot of situations that make it hard. We need to have some flexibility for open meetings, and you know, in a crisis. Okay, some of us couldn't get to the courthouse for a meeting. We had an emergency meeting. We couldn't get to the courthouse. Some people were stuck. We had to call in. You couldn't just call in and have a meeting on the phone without the county attorney being involved and setting some parameters. And he had to have every member of the public given the opportunity to call in and listen to the meeting. And so when we did get a meeting set up by phone, I couldn't even get in because the residents had, the citizens had filled the phone lines. I had to call in on a cell phone to one of the other commissioners to put me on a speakerphone so I could participate in the meeting. That's tough situation in a crisis, but from crisis you learn things, and we learned that there need to be some or just some special provisions that when you have a major event, you can't follow all the rules. Those rules are in place to protect the public so that there won't be any kind of collusion or any illegal meetings and things like that. But I think the public would understand if the county commissioners can't meet and talk to decide on how to handle a crisis, you're not being well served in that disaster, in that emergency. So it's something we need to look at real closely. So I don't have any horror stories about debris removal. It went fairly well in Fort Bend County. Now we had less than 7,000 homes that were flooded in Fort Bend County. You know, you probably had 700,000 in Houston. So it's a little different situation on a scale. And our damage was limited to certain areas. You know, we got to understand that the Brazos River cuts right through Fort Bend County. And so you had rain that fell during the event, but it rained upstream, and all that water came down. Okay. And the county developed along the river, and there are a series of levees that protected a lot of neighborhoods from being totally flooded. And so those levees are necessary, and they're so necessary that had it not been for the levees, that area wouldn't have been able to be developed. And those of us who live out here speak subdivision, so you can imagine that Sienna Plantation, had there been no levee, there'd have been 6 feet of water in Sienna Plantation. You know, Greatwood, New Territory, all these areas that are protected by levee, so they could be developed into subdivisions. And the levees held up. There were no breaches in the levee. The flooding that happened in some of the neighborhoods was not a result of the water, the river water coming over the levee, just the opposite. It's that the pumps couldn't pump the rainwater out of the subdivision into the river fast enough, over the levee fast enough. So that was a problem. Those pumps were designed to handle, a major event, and it did. But you had a major event 3 days in a row. And so by the third day, by the time the water was draining out, it couldn't pump it out fast enough. And so there are homes that took on water. The other major part in the Fort Bend County flooding, and most of it occurred in the Barker Reservoir. And so that area was intentionally flooded to protect downtown Houston. So, just one of those situations that happened, and that's a long story on how that's going to ever get worked out. But those homes were intentionally flooded because they were inside the Barker Reservoir.
I have a question.
Okay. Okay.
I'm Lonzo Curry with the State Conference of the NAACP. On your contract, your pre-positioned contract, did it have provisions for minorities who are interested in that type of contract to bid on the prime contract? And also, does that prime contract have any provisions if they subcontract that they include minorities in those subcontracts?
The answer is no. And the reason why, the state law doesn't allow counties to do that. The counties don't have ordinance making power. We can only do what the state Constitution and the statute says we can do, and that's one thing we can't do. But what happens is in a commissioner's court, there are 5 members. That makes one member very powerful. In the legislature, you got 150 House members and 31 state senators. You got to have seniority, you got to be in the right party, be on the right committee. It happens a little different. On commissioner's court, there are 5 members. You need 3 votes as a majority. So it's easy to build consensus and get your deal done. And so the position I'm in affords me to get those other 2 votes to get something happen. So we've got a lot of, you never hear anybody complain or talk about the lack of minority business participation in Fort Bend County, because there's a lot of participation in Fort Bend County, because I've been here 28 years and I've been able to make it happen. But I couldn't do it for pre-positioning assets for debris removal, just one thing that was out of my control. Hope I answered your question.
And I don't really have much to add to it. I mean, Grady and I discussed it, and I know if there was a way he could have done it, he would have did it, like he has in the past. But the state of Texas has the HUB program, and one of the things that in every contract over $100,000 has to have a HUB subcontracting plan where that vendor has to have those goals. They have to, right now we're talking about, contracts in the billions of dollars. And one of the things that I've been working on along with Senator Boris Miles is to make sure that the state of Texas, that those vendors are meeting those HUB goals. And that's something that we haven't seen them do that well. And that's why we have to be at the table. The NAACP is a great watchdog to make sure that we're holding them accountable, and they're doing it. If we don't push, if we don't pry, they don't do it. If we don't, hold their feet to the fire, then oftentimes they don't meet those goals. And so it's incumbent upon us as leaders to be that voice of those African-American contractors, to make sure that they have an opportunity to compete for those contracts. The HUB program has been watered down in recent years. In fact, most of the people who get those contracts are Anglo women. Anglo women are a category to HUBs, as are Native Americans, Hispanics, African Americans, any minority group. And most recently, we added to the definition a service disabled veteran. That is a part of the HUB contracting, part as well. So our job, me as an elected official, I have to represent everybody, but I will definitely tell you that I try to make sure African Americans have their fair share, and it helps having the NAACP there at the table. Many of those bills that I filed with Senator West and Senator Miles, Yanis Banks from the NAACP was there to testify, Gary, in favor of those bills. Unfortunately, we didn't get those bills passed, but we've moved the needle. We've had conversations that have helped move the needle. The Texas Legislative Black Caucus, that's been a top agenda of ours. And so while we haven't gotten everything that we want, we've made some strides, and we still have a long way to go until we see more African Americans have opportunities. We're talking about billions of dollars that's going to be spent in this recovery, in this rebuild process. There's no reason why, we can't have more African Americans doing it. There's so many that are competent, capable, and qualified. They just don't get those opportunities. But that's why it's good to have these type of dialogues so that we can, continue to be engaged and understand what's at stake, and making sure that it's not just, me and Senator Miles and Senator West. It needs to be other legislators as well. But right now, you just have a very few who are just pushing. There needs to be more people making noise.
Yay! Come on, y'all. Thank you. Thank you.